Here at WinOwl we tell stories that don't always end well, but almost always leave a scar that speaks. Stories that could be yours, your neighbors, your best friends, or that person you're idealizing right now. If you like intense stories of betrayal, desire, guilt, and choices that change lives, I'm inviting you to subscribe to the WinOwl channel, hit like on this video, and share it with someone who needs to wake up. Here we talk with no filters, but with respect, and every story is both a warning and a mirror. What I'm about to tell you today starts with a perfect wedding and ends with a glass of champagne exploding in the bride's face, in front of cameras, guests, and millions of strangers. A well-dressed man, a venomous speech, an accusation of infidelity that went viral in a matter of hours. But the truly dark part isn't that moment. It's the plan behind it. A plan he repeated, over and over, with other women. I want you to listen to everything, slowly, and at the end, tell me if you think what we did was justice, or revenge. Because let me confess something, sometimes you work with other people's pain with the cold precision of a surgeon, but that doesn't mean your hands aren't shaking on the inside. I learned to control my pain with my head, not with my heart. But this case, the one about Evelyn and Mason, still wakes me up in the middle of the night. Tell me, before we go on, if you saw a bride being humiliated at her own altar, in front of everyone, would you think she must have done something? Or would you ask yourself what kind of man stands up just to destroy the person he claims to love? My name is Daniel. I've been a private investigator for 15 years. And even if it sounds like a cheap cliché, I swear nothing has taught me more about love than lies. I'm not married. I don't have some big romantic story to brag about. What I have are folders, recordings, photos, and testimonies from people who thought no one would ever betray them, until someone decided to prove them wrong. I met Evelyn after her wedding. By then, the video of her humiliation had already gone around the world. You probably saw it and don't even remember it, a bride in a tight white dress, flawless makeup, hands trembling as she holds a glass. An expensive hotel ballroom, warm lighting, white flowers, that generic wedding music that sounds the same everywhere. And suddenly, the groom. No. Half a husband, really, because the civil ceremony had been the day before, steps up to the microphone. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, Mason says, with a crooked, almost cinematic smile. Then he looks at her, tilts the glass, and drenches her in champagne in front of everyone. The foam runs down her hair, her neck, her cleavage. Someone lets out a nervous laugh. Someone else whispers, "No way." And he finishes with, "Let's raise a glass to faithful brides, because I wasn't lucky enough to find one." You, if you'd been there, would you have rushed to wipe Evelyn's face? Or would you have stayed frozen, watching the show? The first time I saw that video, it was without sound, on a TV screen at the bar where I usually grab lunch. There were headlines underneath, "Humiliation of the Year, Unfaithful Bride Exposed, Viral Wedding." People were laughing, filming the TV with their phones so they could post it on their socials. I looked at her expression. My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. I didn't see guilt in those eyes. I saw something worse, confusion. Like when you're dreaming that you're falling and you can't understand why no one is reaching out to catch you. I shut off the noise in my head, paid the bill, and left. In my line of work, I don't allow myself to get involved in what isn't my business. Until it becomes my business. And that happened a few weeks later, when a woman named Rachel walked through the door of my office. Rachel had nothing to do, apparently, with Evelyn. Dark hair, corporate style, mid-30s, hard gaze. She sat across from me, dropped a thick folder on the desk, and said, without sugarcoating anything, "I want you to destroy a man." I'll admit, when someone walks in like that, my first instinct is to think I'm dealing with an exaggeration. What would you think? Madness? Spite? Drama? I asked her to breathe, told her we'd start from the beginning. She told me about a charming, sophisticated guy she'd met at a charity event. A man who seemed to read her mind, anticipate her tastes, guess her insecurities. A man who, over time, cut her off from her friends, convinced her family didn't really value her, and slowly talked her into signing papers, granting him powers of attorney, making investments in both their names. That man's name was Mason. At first I didn't connect him to the one from the video. Mason isn't exactly a rare name. But she kept talking, and I started to notice a pattern I know all too well, the pattern of a patient predator. Rachel told me how, after nearly 2 years together, small amounts of money began to disappear, how he always had a flawless explanation, a receipt, a reason to make her feel paranoid every time she doubted him. She told me about nights where he left her crying alone, convincing her she was emotionally unstable, that she was having episodes. About how she came to believe she was sick in the head. Until one day, he vanished. Literally. Without a trace. And weeks later, she found out he was engaged to another wealthy woman. A woman named Evelyn. I don't want him back, Rachel told me. I want someone to do something to him. Or someone to stop him. I don't know. Anything. But he can't keep getting away with this. I asked her for details. I searched online. And there he was, the man from the video, the one with the champagne glass, the one who had humiliated his bride in front of the world. He smiled in old photos, posing with Evelyn on trips, in restaurants, on beaches. I'm late, I told Rachel. This already blew up from another angle. No, she answered, staring straight at me. For Evelyn, this is not over yet. Let me ask you something. If you knew someone had hurt several people following the same pattern, would you think about reporting him, exposing him, or would you just walk away so you wouldn't get your hands dirty? Rachel didn't know Evelyn personally. She'd seen the video, like everyone else. But her anger was mixed with something I recognized, guilt. Guilt for not having exposed him sooner, for not warning the next one. I was the test run, she said bitterly. He stole money from me. From her, he stole her dignity and filmed it in 4K. For weeks I worked the case the way I handle most others, tracing financial trails, shell companies, properties under third-party names. The usual. I found out Mason hadn't just taken money from Rachel, he'd done the same to at least 2 other women before her, always with the same strategy: seduction, isolation, emotional manipulation, questioning the victim's mental health, and when things became unsustainable, vanishing with part or most of the shared assets. What didn't fit was the wedding episode. It was too public, too risky. If his modus operandi was to move in the shadows, why expose himself like that? The answer came 3 months later, when Evelyn walked through the door of my office. She was shorter than she looked in the pictures. Her hair was pulled back in a messy bun, no makeup, an oversized jacket that hung off her frame. Nothing like the perfect bride in the magazines that had used her image without consent just to mock her. She walked in slowly, closed the door very gently, like she didn't want to make a sound. She stayed standing. Are you Daniel? She asked, her voice worn out. I nodded, without getting up yet. In my line of work, every gesture counts. If I jumped to my feet, if I bombarded her with questions, I could break her, or scare her away. Come in, sit down. Can I get you water, coffee? No. She shook her head. I just need to tell this to someone who doesn't think I'm crazy. She only really looked me in the eye then. And in her gaze, beneath the exhaustion, I saw something that surprised me: wounded pride, yes, but also a kind of cold, contained fury. Like mine. Go ahead, I said. Take your time. Let me ask you something. When life shatters you in public, would you hide forever, or would you look for a way to get your voice back? She told me everything. From the beginning. How she met Mason at an art gallery, how he approached her with that disarming confidence, dark suit, neatly trimmed beard, slow smile. How he talked about his work, his travels, his complicated past with women who had used him for his money and left him broken. How, without even realizing it, she felt the urge to prove she wasn't like those others. You know how that works, right? When someone presents themselves as a victim, you lower your guard. Has that ever happened to you? The first dates were straight out of a movie: candlelit dinners, expensive wine she couldn't even pronounce, boutique hotels where the sheets smelled like expensive cotton and perfume. The first time he brushed her hand, she felt that stupid warmth that runs up your arm and settles in your chest. She described one scene in particular. They were in a hotel bar, similar to the one that would later become the setting for something else. There was this amber light behind the bar, she told me, staring at her hands. Everything looked softer. He came up behind me to show me something on his phone. His chest touched my back. His breath brushed my ear. I closed my eyes for a second. When I opened them, his hand was on my waist, barely. Nothing crude. Just certainty. I don't need to tell you more. The body remembers things the mind later doesn't understand. From that point on, Evelyn began to give herself over, little by little. Not out of stupidity, but out of hunger for certainty. Mason flooded her with attention, messages, small calculated gestures, a coat in the early hours of the morning, a coffee at the exact time she had the most work, and I miss you just when she was starting to doubt. Sometimes, when she spoke about him, her voice broke. Not because she missed him, but because of the humiliation of having believed. The first time we had a serious fight, it was about money, she told me. He suggested we invest together in a project. I had an inheritance from my father. He'd put in the same amount. But when I asked him to sign something, he got offended. Said I didn't trust him, that the women who had hurt him before were like that, materialistic, suspicious. He cried. A man nearly 40 years old, crying in my kitchen. She fell silent for a moment. I ended up apologizing to him. Have you ever apologized for something that, deep down, you know you didn't do wrong, just so they wouldn't leave you? Over time, she gave in. She did it in her own way, with conditions, with paperwork she thought she had checked thoroughly. Mason was skilled. Between legal clauses and technical terms, he hid the trap. If the relationship ended due to emotional instability on her part, he would keep practically everything they had invested. That's why he needed the public scene. That's why the accusation of infidelity. It wasn't just humiliation, it was strategy. By the time Evelyn finished talking, my office was in semi-darkness. We hadn't noticed the sun had gone down. Rachel, I said finally. Does that name ring a bell? I watched the muscles in her neck tense up. Yes. She wrote to me on Instagram. She saw me in an interview I did afterward, defending Mason. I was still defending him, can you believe that? She told me she knew him, that I was next. I didn't believe her. I thought she was crazy. That she wanted to destroy our relationship. Mason had told me he had an unstable ex. She laughed, without any real humor. Turns out she was the only sane one in the whole story. I already knew Rachel's version. Now I had Evelyn's. The central piece missing was him. I laid out what we knew. I told her about the other women. The lost money. The documents. And that's when I saw Evelyn change for the first time. She straightened up in the chair, shoulders back, eyes blazing. Can we prove it? She asked. Maybe, I replied. But it won't be easy. He's good at covering his tracks. And right now, he's presenting himself to the world as the victim of infidelity. I didn't cheat on him, she said. Not once. I know. She stared at me, surprised. How? Because you don't have the face of a liar. You have the face of someone who judges herself too harshly. Let me ask you, do you trust your intuition about people, or do you always need proof? Evidence, unfortunately, was necessary if we wanted anything more than emotional catharsis. Evelyn didn't just want to clear her name online, she wanted him to pay. And not with another public humiliation, but with the only things people like him really feel, their freedom and their money. I know someone at the DA's office, I told her. But before that, we need him to talk. To feel safe. To incriminate himself. Do you think he will? Narcissists always talk too much. You just have to give them the right stage. That's where the plan was born. Rachel, despite everything he'd done to her, agreed to help. She was bitter, sure, but she also had a deep need to help Evelyn. We staged a coincidence. Mason would get a message from Evelyn, weeks after the wedding, asking to see him one last time to clear the air and, eventually, negotiate a quiet financial settlement. That part was very hard for her to accept. Tell me, could you sit across from someone who humiliated you like that, pretend to be calm, get close enough to let him talk? We chose the place carefully, the hotel bar where several guests had stayed during the wedding. Not the same room, but the same building. We wanted him to feel like he was on his turf. A lot of emotional predators relax when they sense they're on familiar ground. That night, Evelyn walked into the bar dressed simply, almost understated, black pants, a cream blouse, a coat that fell halfway down her thighs. What made her stand out wasn't the clothes, it was the way she looked around, alert, but with a cold gaze. Under the coat, tucked near the edge of her bra, she wore a tiny microphone. I was in a hotel room 2 floors up, headphones on, connected to the recording equipment. Rachel, in another room, listened in silence. I'll be honest with you, when I saw Evelyn for the last time before she went down to the bar, I wanted to tell her to drop everything, that it wasn't worth risking more emotional damage. But I didn't. Sometimes protecting someone also means letting them do what they need to do. If at any point you want out, just say the word rain in a sentence, I told her. Drop your gaze, stand up, and leave. I'll handle the rest. She nodded. For a second, she just looked at me. We were too close. The hallway smelled like clean carpet and cheap air freshener. I felt her breath, short and shallow, against my throat. Thank you, she whispered. For believing me. We didn't touch. We didn't need to. But there was a brief moment when our hands almost brushed. The body always moves ahead of the heart, no matter how tough you pretend to be. Do you think it's possible to fall for someone precisely when you're seeing them at their worst? Mason arrived on time. On the screen in front of me, I watched him walk between the tables as if he knew he was being watched, elegant, self-assured. Dark suit, expensive watch, that I've got this expression I'd seen in his photos. He leaned in to greet Evelyn with a kiss on the cheek. His lips touched her skin. She shivered, but managed to disguise it as just a chill. You look better, he said, taking his seat. Drama suits you. You're always so charming, she replied, with a smile only I knew was a mask. They ordered champagne. Yes. Champagne. The choice was almost obscene. He lifted the glass and rolled it between his fingers. I'm guessing you want to talk about money, he said. Everyone wants to talk about money in the end. I want to talk about how we ended, she said. And about what you did to me in front of everyone. Well, he leaned back in his seat. If you didn't want consequences, you shouldn't have slept with someone else. His voice sounded calm, but I could hear what he was doing, testing whether she'd defend herself or carry the guilt. Evelyn took a deep breath. Mason, there was no one else. You know that. Silence. I could hear the ice clink against the glass as he moved his drink. I could also hear my own pulse. What I know, he finally said, is that I needed a reason. And you gave me one. There it was, a crack. A reason for what? She asked, her tone neutral. To get out of you without losing everything. He smiled. You know the contracts weren't exactly in your favor if we could prove you were unstable. And tell me, what's more unstable than a bride cheating on her groom before the wedding? I swallowed hard. We had something, but it wasn't enough. We needed him to talk about the others, the earlier times. I never thought you'd be capable of planning something like that, Evelyn said, lowering her voice a little, leaning in closer. You knew me. You knew I'd fall apart. That move at closing the distance is more powerful than any line. From my room, I watched them, her resting her forearm on the table, him tilting his head toward her, the warm bar light carving out their profiles. If this had been a different story, it would have been a romantic scene. But it wasn't. Don't be dramatic, he replied. You're not the first. Ask Rachel. Well, assuming she's still taking her pills. Evelyn caught her breath. She'd known he would mention Rachel, but not so soon. The meds were your idea, weren't they? She pushed. Convincing her she was crazy? Mason smiled, that superior little smile Rachel had described so many times. I don't convince anyone of anything, Evelyn. I just show them a version of reality that suits them, and they go along with it. Rachel was a mess before she met me. I just organized the chaos. And when chaos gets out of hand, you have to protect yourself. He took a sip of champagne. His fingers slid along the stem of the glass. Same with you. You had too much to lose. I just protected my investments. Your investments, she repeated. Is that what we all were to you? Investments? Of course. He shrugged. You think love pays the bills? Love is useful as long as it gives you access. To circles, to checkbooks, to contacts. After that, it's dead weight. His cynicism was so clean it hurt. Evelyn lowered her gaze and let the silence stretch. Through my headphones, I heard her draw in a slow breath. How many investments did you have before me? She asked, almost in a whisper. 3? 4? And that's when Mason's ego did what it always does. Depends on what you're counting. He laughed. Some of them never even understood the game. Rachel, for example, was a trial run. She had money, sure, but too many scruples. She wasn't ready to cut loose from her family. The other one, the one from Monterey, was easier to handle, but she fell in love too fast. You were the perfect mix. Naive, but with a spotless public image. You had a reputation, photos, interviews, that's gold when you want it to look like someone's falling apart. I felt a knot in my throat. It wasn't the first time I'd heard something like that, but it never stops hitting you. Could you stay seated, calm, listening to someone talk like that about the people they've hurt? Evelyn played her role perfectly. She never raised her voice, never accused him directly. She steered him into talking about the contracts, the powers of attorney, the joint accounts. He, almost proud, bragged about how easy it was to move money around when the other person trusted you. The trick, he said, with a calm that froze my blood, is making them believe they're the ones making the decisions. You suggest things, you give them options, you make them feel strong. And meanwhile, you keep track of where the money leaks. We had enough of a confession to feed a hungry prosecutor, but we needed one more thing: intent. We needed him to acknowledge that, from the beginning, the plan was to take the money and destroy her credibility. So, Evelyn toyed with the napkin, folding it. From day one, you knew you were going to leave me? He stared at her for a long moment. There was a flicker of something there, maybe humanity, maybe just calculation. From day one, he corrected, I knew you were going to be useful. The rest was a consequence. And the champagne at the wedding? Marketing, he answered, without blinking. You don't get the chance every day to create a story people remember. Besides, that emotional instability clause looked beautiful with that kind of show. Right then, I pressed the button on my phone. It was the signal for the police and the prosecutor waiting in another room. What came next happened fast. Too fast, if you compare it to everything that had led up to it. 2 officers walked into the bar, discreetly. They approached the table, showed their IDs. It took Mason a few seconds to understand the show was over and that, for the first time, he was the one who wasn't in control of the script. Mason, I said, as I came closer, slipping the audio device into my pocket. Let me introduce you to the edited version of your own story. He didn't answer. His eyes jumped from Evelyn to me, from me to the officers. You're under arrest, one of them said, for fraud, swindling, and other charges you'll hear about in detail. While they were cuffing him, I looked back at Evelyn. She wasn't smiling, she wasn't crying. She had the expression of someone who was finally watching the monster climb down from the pedestal and turn back into just a man. Would you have felt relief, anger, emptiness? What would you feel, seeing the person who destroyed you fall like that? The trial was long and cold. Paperwork, forensic reports, testimony from Rachel, from the other women, from accountants, notaries, bank employees. The recording in the bar was the centerpiece. Hearing his own voice describe the game in front of a courtroom was the first time, I think, I saw him doubt himself. Evelyn had to relive the wedding again and again. Every angle, every comment on social media, every interview where they branded her the cheating bride became evidence in her favor. Mason's theater ended up being the stage for his own downfall. Months later, the judge read out the sentence. Years in prison. Restitution of funds. A ban on holding any executive position in companies related to investments. The headlines read, "The Millionaire Bride Scammer." For once, the spotlight wasn't on them. The day the sentence came out, Evelyn came to see me at the office. She was wearing a different dress, simple, with a pattern. She looked younger. Or maybe it was just the absence of weight on her shoulders. "We won," she said as soon as she came in. "You won," I corrected her. She sat down, crossed her legs. A comfortable silence settled between us. Outside, it was raining, one of those soft rains that soaks everything without making a fuss. I realized I'd been waiting weeks for that visit, without admitting it to myself. "And now what?" I asked, more to break the silence than anything. "Now." She shrugged. "Now I have to learn how to live without my name being a meme." She laughed softly. I did too. "Have you thought about leaving for a while?" I suggested. "Getting out of the city, breathing different air?" "I did," she said. "But I don't know. Running away isn't the solution either. I don't want my story to stay just as the champagne bride. I want something else." Then she looked at me in a different way. It wasn't the look of a victim or a client. It was something closer, more human. "I want to trust again," she said. "I don't know in whom. But in someone. Is that even possible?" The question hit me hard. Me, who had built his entire life on professional distrust, didn't have an easy answer. What would you have told her? Would you tell her never to trust anyone again, or to take the risk one more time? "It's possible," I said at last. "But not like before. Not from naivety anymore, but from choice. With your eyes open. And knowing that sometimes they're going to fail you anyway." She stood up. Walked to the window, watched the rain for a while. Her silhouette against the glass had something melancholy about it and, at the same time, something strong. I walked over, slowly. I could smell the faint floral perfume on her neck, almost imperceptible. "Sometimes I think," she whispered, "that if none of this had happened, I would never have known who Mason really was. And I would have gone on living in a pretty lie." "Pretty lies are the most expensive ones," I answered. She turned to face me. We were close, like that night in the hotel hallway. I could see the fine lines at the corners of her eyes, marks from nights without sleep. I could feel the gentle warmth radiating from her body. For a moment, I thought about leaning in. Just a little. It wasn't some teenage impulse. It was the exhaustion of two people who'd spent too long holding up their whole world with their jaws clenched. But I didn't. She didn't either. She just lifted a hand and touched my forearm, light, barely a brush. That tiny gesture cut through me more than any hug could have. "Thank you, Daniel," she said. "Not just for catching him. For not treating me like a case." "You never were," I answered. She left a few minutes later. I watched her walk away down the wet street, the umbrella like a small black dome over her head. I don't know if I'll ever see her again. Sometimes we talk, from a distance, by message. She sends me photos of the paintings she's working on now, of her dog, of a beach she escaped to for a weekend. Life goes on, even when you feel like you're still stuck in a single scene. Do you think we'll ever be completely safe from people like Mason? Or is that just part of the risk of loving, that there will always be someone willing to use that word as a tool? I'm telling you this story not so you start distrusting everyone, but so that next time you see a viral video of someone being humiliated, you ask yourself what's behind it. Not everything that looks like deserved punishment really is. Sometimes it's just part of the plan of someone who knows that public opinion is the perfect weapon. I keep working. I keep listening to men and women tell me how someone promised them heaven and left them with debts, videos, scars. I keep mastering my pain with a cold kind of intelligence, because somebody has to keep a clear head when everyone else's heart is falling apart. But there are nights, I won't lie to you, when I remember Evelyn with champagne running down her face, the dress glued to her skin, and I wonder how many people laughed at her without realizing they were applauding the strategy of a con artist. And I also remember her later, sitting in my office while it rained outside, saying she wants to trust again. That image keeps me going more than I'd like to admit. So now I want to hear from you. Do you think Evelyn should give love another chance? Do you think it's okay that I felt something for her, even while keeping my distance? Was what we did justice, or just a small bit of balance in a world that always seems to tilt toward those who do the hurting? I really do want to know what you think. Leave your thoughts in the comments. What would you have done in her place? Would you have faced Mason in that bar? Would you have had the courage to watch him in handcuffs? Would you tell Evelyn to share her story with the world, or to close that chapter forever? And if this story made you think about your own relationships, your own wounds, I'm inviting you to stay here at WinOwl. Subscribe to the channel, like this video, and share it with someone who might be idealizing their own Mason without realizing it. We'll keep telling stories that hurt, but also wake you up. Because sometimes, the only way to stop being someone's victim is to tell what happened. With a steady voice, even if, on the inside, you're still shaking.